Welcome to my multimedia project. This is Lynn. I chose to explore the book Ministry Among God's Queer Folk by David Kuntz. Dr. Chang recommended the book to me. It was a good fit because I have had a passion for work at the intersection of spiritual care and the queer community for quite some time. I will use the terms pastoral care and spiritual care alternately in this project. The book author uses pastoral care, but I receive these concepts as applicable to many faith traditions, some of whom may not resonate with the term pastoral care. So, why is this my passion? Due to a history of widespread, culturally ingrained oppression and marginalization, often members of the LGBTQI community do not automatically look to us, spiritual care providers, for support or nurture. However, we are uniquely equipped to provide holistic care. Much of the advocacy work towards an appropriate ethic of care for LGBTQI people has focused on educating mental health providers, medical providers, and legal providers. Often professionals in these fields are not equipped to holistically address the needs of whole people, whole families, and communities in the way that spiritual care providers are. When spiritual care providers are present in care settings in support of queer people, we also bear witness to the lived experiences of queer people in these settings. We bring with us all of the moral authority of our religious traditions, and sometimes our very presence can elevate the quality of care. As spiritual care providers, we are engaged in questions of ultimate meaning that align with many queer journeys. Questions such as, who am I? Where do I fit in this world? And will society ever truly see me? Are deeply spiritual questions, but are also questions that LGBTQI people encounter in their daily lives as they struggle for visibility, equity, and appropriate care. The traditional role of spiritual care providers, visiting people in the hospital, checking on those struggling with illness, and showing up for those who are navigating major medical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual situations, is literally life-changing work. To be able to do this work with authenticity, each of us, as spiritual care providers, need to examine our own ideas and preconceptions about gender and sexuality. This is not work to be done at the bedside or other care contexts with queer people. We must do our work on our own first. About this project. The content of this video is a combination of informational graphics from various sources, my own created word clouds, my own voiceover, and my own original drawings. About the book. According to the author, this book is based on the belief that sexual orientation and gender identity are God-given gifts that are good and holy variations of human sexuality. Queer people are as capable of spiritual authenticity and holiness as anyone else. This book also is based on the assumption that for the vast number of queer people, who they are as gendered and/or sexual beings is an unchangeable given, as it is for heterosexual people. The positions of this book are based on 4 assumptions. 1. The Jewish and Christian value of welcoming the stranger. 2. The support of the human lived experience and testimony of queer people of faith. Number 3. the overwhelming support of the scientific and psychological disciplines. And number 4, the fact that historically, in literally all religious traditions, strong moral stances are often not seen as immutable. Through study and reflection, we may change our minds over time and still remain faithful. It is the author's belief, as well as my own, that if you are a spiritual leader who wishes to serve well the queer members of your congregation, it is incumbent upon you to learn how to become a caregiver who ministers positively and effectively to queer folk. The book, Ministry Among God's Queer Folk, is divided into 6 sections: the pastoral care relationship, the functions of pastoral care in tough times, coming out, creating communities of care, and caring for relationships. As opposed to going section by section, I will weave components from these sections throughout the discussion of the concept of this book. There's a vast variety of resources related to sexual or gender identity with which caregivers should be familiar. 2 of these worth noting that are discussed in this text are the Kinsey and Klein scales. No model of identity development is flawless. One aspect of the Kinsey and Klein models of which caregivers should be aware is that they focus on sexual orientation, not gender identity, so they may be of limited usefulness as a resource for caregiving with trans folk. Pastoral care, or spiritual care. According to the authors, pastoral care is the expression of pastoral theology and brings it to life because it manifests in the doing of theology day to day. Pastoral theology is practical and functional, while its foundation is systematic, moral, and spiritual theology, which serves as the basis for pastoral or spiritual care. To remain effective, a caregiver's pastoral theology must also be organic, vibrant, developing, and a vehicle for dealing with an always changing people in a constantly changing world. Spiritual care is also the relationship of concern and service between a minister of religion and the people that person serves, within the context and with the motivation of religious faith. There are many kinds of care. Pastoral care is distinctive in that it is charged by faith. Spiritual care providers rely on a variety of resources, such as insights from science and human psychology. These resources are utilized in a unique, holistic way by spiritual care providers, as they are all bound together by faith. This basis in faith permeates the whole spiritual care experience. Some caregiving challenges in spiritual care for queer folks. Many of the world's traditions are religions of the book, meaning that a sacred text is their foundation. Some also hold tradition in a very high place of honor and power. While acknowledging that this is true, it is also acknowledged that faith communities will no doubt continue to disagree strongly over interpretations of their sacred texts and traditions as they relate to queer people. All too often, the result of providing spiritual care for queer folks can bring serious trouble to the spiritual care provider from their local faith community or from their denomination. Many pioneers in this work have faced morally damaging effects to their lives and careers, including dismissal and forced resignations. These care encounters can also be rough for queer folk. Discussing care needs and past experiences with a faith community can trigger shame and blame responses and bring fear and isolation to the care seeker. If we care for LGBTQI people who are sick, we may also deal with critical topics such as HIV and AIDS, sexual trauma, addiction, and violence. Not because these are inherent to the queer experience, but because many queer folk have been in such places of despair that they may have had direct encounters with these realities for a variety of reasons. LGBTQI people, and particularly trans folk, need to make many significant decisions, often over an extended period of time, about how they want to live their lives. But it is important to know and to keep in the front of our awareness that being transgender, bisexual, lesbian, or gay is almost never a choice. So why is this important? In examining why spiritual care for God's queer folk is so important, I will turn to the functions of pastoral care section discussed by the author. The first section is healing. Pastoral care is concerned with healing. Most care seekers have a presenting situation or presenting problem that brings them to seek care. For queer folk, the fact that they have sought spiritual care may be a milestone in their life. Healing can be about addressing healthcare situations, past trauma, or ongoing situations which bring pain into the life of the individual. While in a care session with you, this may be the first time that they have voiced the hurt they wish to have help in healing. Being fully present, active listening, and encouragement are critical to beginning a care relationship where the care seeker feels safe enough to work through the rough spots and move towards healing and wholeness. Sustaining is another aspect of pastoral care that is vitally important. When a person seeks care with a pastoral or spiritual care provider, continuing to work towards healing may mean beginning that process with the pastoral care provider, but to be sustainable, it is likely that other care professionals may take over the care. The goal is to keep the forward motion going by providing the appropriate care with the appropriate individual. Guiding is an important aspect of spiritual care for anyone, and LGBTQI people are no exception. It is not reasonable to expect of ourselves that because we have empathy for a situation, that we know all the answers. Our role is to be more of a guide along the journey and encouragement to keep going than the source of definitive answers for everyone we care for. Reconciling is something that may well be an issue for queer folk seeking pastoral care. All too often, queer people have been harmed inadvertently or intentionally by faith communities or faith leaders. When this happens, an understandable response is for the person to distance themselves from the source of that injury, marginalization, and trauma. As spiritual care providers, we can serve as a companion on the journey to reconciliation when the individual is ready to begin on that path. Nurturing is one of the most important things that we do as spiritual care providers, no matter what the situation. It is important that we are true leaders in nurturing LGBTQI individuals and families. For many of us, the idea of being a nurturer is what brought us to ministry in the first place. If we have truly created a community of care and caring relationships, we should be ready to equip our congregations to nurture queer people of faith within and beyond the walls of our gathering places. The queer folk among us are gifts from God, who have to live their lives and make their decisions in the present moment. Queer folks are doing this publicly as out individuals who belong to dynamic queer communities. This is a new thing, which I believe to be the work of God alive and speaking in today's world. As we read in Isaiah 43:19, I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? The work of being in ministry with God's queer folk is as exciting as it is essential. I've been involved in this work for a number of years. Won't you join me? Let's see what random, and not so random, acts of radical love and holy trouble we can create to make the world of today a manifestation of God's holy realm here on earth.